One of Keynes's most famous works was called The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill, and it's about time somebody wrote a similar book entitled The Economic Consequences of Rachel Reeves, because Rachel Reeves is getting things wrong by accident rather than by design. Regular viewers of these videos will know that I think that Labour governments almost always make bad economic decisions. I think they have problems understanding how the economy works, and they don't understand what motivates people to build the economy to create growth. But on top of that, you've got a government and a Chancellor who keeps on misleading the markets, giving false signals, false indications, and making problems dramatically worse. Let's roll back to the 4th of July 2024, the election that the Conservatives lost. The next day, Rachel Reeves became the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and what did she do? She started talking the economy down. Now, this is an accusation governments make against oppositions when the opposition is criticising government policy. Frankly, when oppositions do it, it does not matter. It doesn't matter because the opposition isn't in charge. So what the opposition says is opinion rather than authoritative. When governments talk the economy down, it's different because the markets believe that the government is authoritative. So when she got into office, she started saying that it was a terrible mess, much worse than she'd been led to believe, worse than she had understood, and therefore she would have to take decisions that she didn't want to take. Now, this wasn't true. This wasn't the 1960s when economic data were hard to come by. This was a period when economic data was plentiful. There was nothing she knew after the election that wasn't patently obvious before. So it wasn't true, but it also wasn't beneficial because it made people think that the economy was in a worse state and they reacted accordingly. This had an effect on businesses, on business investment, and on investors in the UK. If the government says we're all going to hell in a handcart, you don't try and jump into the handcart. You try and avoid it altogether. So that was mistake number one, the briefing around what the state of the economy was. Then you get to the budget, a long delayed budget last year, as this year, with lots of speculation of all the worst things that the Chancellor could do to make life painful for us. This may be seen as clever briefing of a strategy where you try and persuade people it's all going to be awful, so on the day it's a little bit better. You try and lull people into a false sense of gloom so that when budget day comes, they think, oh good, it's not so bad after all. Again, that's a terrible mistake because in the old days, the Chancellor of the Exchequer would go into something called purdah, a term adopted actually from Islam as a period when people are separate, are away. And that in this purdah, the Chancellor would give no interviews and the Treasury would make no comment about what was about to be done because the budget needed to be kept secret. This has changed in recent years, and now lots of kites are flown in the hope that some will fall to earth and those policies won't be followed, others will never happen but will help people think things are a little bit better than they are. The problem with these kites is that they affect people's behavior. People respond to the kites and they change what they're going to do. They take capital gains early. They decide not to sell a house or to buy a house because they think stamp duty may change. They leave the country because they think there may be an exit tax. So these briefings have consequences. And that was clear last year. The tax changes that then came in were fundamentally anti-business. The 2% increase in employers' national insurance has led quite clearly to a fall in employment and a rise in unemployment and a rise in inflation as extra costs have been passed through to consumers. A really bad economic decision, the economic consequences of Mrs. Reeves, as she personally took that decision to break a manifesto commitment not to put up national insurance, using weasel words around the manifesto, but one that had profound economic consequences, which we are suffering from, and is part of the reason for the very low growth in the last quarter, because it affected business activity. Then you have the attack through death duties on farmers, and even more importantly, on businesses. Most of the commentary has concentrated on farmers, but actually it's small businesses that will be hit even more because there are more of them. This isn't to say the farms aren't important, they are very important, but there are more businesses that will be hit. And this affects investment decisions. Because if you're a small family business and your owner is 90, and you've got an investment decision to make, and you've got cash on the balance sheet, and you know that if the 90-year-old founder lives beyond the 5th of April next year, lives into the new tax year, you will be clobbered by 20% death duties. Do you make that investment and risk not having the cash to pay the tax if the founder dies? Or do you say, well, actually, we're going to need 20% of the value of the business to pay the tax, and therefore we'll leave it in cash, we will postpone the investment? Do you take on the new employee to grow your business, or do you think, actually, if we don't grow the business, the value of the business will be lower and therefore there'll be less tax to pay? Real world economic consequences flow from tax decisions. And the same has happened this time round. They don't learn, and this time it is worse. The property market has come to a complete full stop because of rumoured changes to stamp duty and rumours around mansion taxes. You have had issues in relation to the gilt market, that's government debt, because the government said on the one hand it was going to raise income tax, and now it's said that it won't, creating uncertainty as to how large the fiscal gap will be, how big the deficit will be, unsettling the markets. And if the markets are unsettled, this means you will pay a higher interest rate because the risk is perceived to have risen. And interest rates represent the market's judgment of risk. And so you create more risk by briefing A and then B, and then the markets say, well, we don't know what's going on, and they demand more interest to hold your bonds. So financing the government becomes more difficult at a point when debt interest is over £100 billion a year. It's one of the most important parts of the government's finances. So that's been damaging. You then have the rumours about an exit tax for rich people who leave the country, so rich people have been leaving in advance. You've had rumours on changes to pensions, so people have taken money out of their pension funds, not necessarily at the best time, because they thought you were going to do something about this. This has serious, real market, real economic consequences, and it's not even the policy making. I've discussed some of the policy making, but the rumours around the policy making have been damaging the economy. Then on the other hand, really hopeless approach to government expenditure, with a big increase in payments being made to state employees. So you have costs of government going up, you have the revenue slightly soft, you have uncertainty being created because the government leaks too much, briefs too much, doesn't follow the old rules about purdah. And so we are losing economic growth because of sheer incompetence and vacillation. Probably not the year for quoting anything in relation to the Duke of York, but it's not the immediate former one. It's a rather earlier one. Grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. And when they were up, they were up, and when they were down, they were down. But when they were only halfway up, they were neither up nor down. This is a satirical verse. It is not intended as advice for government policy when deciding how the economy should be run. It seems to me that the new volume, to be produced by the successor to Keynes on the economic consequences of Rachel Reeves, would certainly comment on this vacillation, this inability to have clear purpose, and the damage that that is doing. As always, thank you very much for listening, and to those of you who are worried that my coffee gets cold, and it's very kind of you, I appreciated this. After 10 minutes, it is the perfect temperature. Again, thank you for watching.